You have a number of options. The most obvious probably is entering into what we call a cohabitation agreement. So the premise is that it's going to take effect once you start living together, and the purpose of that document is to record as much or as little information as you both want it to record in terms of how your current assets and your future assets, both as to what you own individually and you might own jointly in the future, will be dealt with. The cohabitation agreement can deal with how you regulate and occupy a property, including how you manage the payment of your everyday bills, gas, electric, water, but also importantly the mortgage. If one of you is moving into the other person's property, it's quite normal to expect a provision within such an agreement to state that you might be sharing the living expenses, so the utilities, but one of you might be responsible for the mortgage alone because it's the property that's in your sole name, and that in the event that that relationship breaks down, it's highly likely that there will be a provision that says that the original owner of the property will continue to own it, and then you could have provisions that provide for division of, for example, contents and furniture that you've acquired at the beginning of the relationship or during the relationship and at the end of it. And one of the good things about the cohabitation agreement is that you've got the ability to actually list all of the assets, contents, furniture within the schedules that would be attached to the document. So there's a record of what there was and obviously what the position is if unfortunately the relationship breaks down. And it's a really good document because I think it makes it clear to both of you and for transparency to know what you're entering into and what the expectations are. So there are no surprises at the end of it. The agreement can set out also if you've got an existing joint bank account or whether you intend to set up one jointly to deal with the expenses of the property, and likewise what the expectation is in terms of putting money into the account, withdrawing money from it, and what happens to the account when and if unfortunately the relationship breaks down. You can also reference if you are going to give gifts to one another during the course of your relationship and how those gifts would be dealt with in the event that your relationship broke down. So you could have an arrangement that you retain them or they might be returned to whoever gifted it. You can also deal with gifts given to you by family members for both of you and how that could be dealt with. You can also include provision as to what would happen in the event of one of you dying before the other. So it can be a really comprehensive and detailed document. We would always advise that you should obviously have a conversation with one another before entering into the cohabitation agreement, because you can only do it if both of you agree, otherwise it's not going to work. And I think it also perhaps does enable both of you to have those quite frank conversations beforehand. The one issue that both of you do need to be made aware of is that as part of the agreement drafting process and negotiation process, both of you have to disclose to one another, to a limited extent, but perhaps a detailed extent, what your assets are, what your incomes are, properties that you own, pensions and so forth. So in order for the agreement to hold up and be as valid as it can be, that is some information that you will need to exchange with one another. So you need to be aware of that before you start your conversation and before you start your negotiations. Because again, it's about transparency going into the agreement. In terms of if that agreement is for a young couple who are going to be living with one another and are starting in their kind of future together and don't have children, the agreement can also set out a provision what would happen in the event that you do have children, because there might be certain different claims that you have against one another once children come along, and also thinking about what the arrangements for the children would be if there is a separation. If it's a couple who are moving in together where they've previously been married and divorced, they've already got adult children and so forth, the cohabitation agreement is useful because, again, it enables you, if you choose to do so, to preserve your assets for your adult children, family members, and so forth. You can make whatever provision you want in terms of a will for your partner in the event that one of you dies. And again, that's a choice that you can make. So you can actually make whatever provision you feel is appropriate. So if you do decide that the relationship is going to take a different legal standing, in the sense that you want to get married to one another, our advice would be that you should at that point look at entering into what's called a prenuptial agreement. In essence, it gives you the same options of making it very clear what the intention would be should the marriage break down. And there are different issues to consider if you are married to one another. And here at Burkett's, we can assist you with both.